Hello and welcome back to My Own Worst Enemy. We're continuing along with the playthrough of Midway, 1982 AD. And correction first, there is a sub under this main body that was actually destroyed last time, so I'm just going to pull that out. We're going to remove it because it did they did destroy that submarine, so that should be gone. That's leaving just one sub group down here next to that Midway invasion force. So coming back from last time, we did have some airstrikes against the Japanese main body. The Hosho ended up taking damage. It did repair, but it lost its ability to launch fighters. In fact, it lost all of its fighter groups. So it is not going to be of much use carrier-wise to the Japanese. And so it is turn 5. The daylight is disappearing rapidly. Turn 6 will be a night turn, as will turn 7. And you'll remember that night turns, you cannot have aircraft launch at all. So it's going to be, there'll be no air combat turns 6 and 7. If we play through turns 6 and 7, I don't know if we will or not. I may just play through this turn and into here because we will have had a pretty good feel of how this thing plays out, I think. But let's go ahead and start. And again, we start with the spotting phase. And this is a critical phase for this turn, because if you don't spot these units, you can't attack them, and there's a lot of potential battles that probably will happen on the map if they do spot. There's an interesting one down here. This Midway invasion force actually contains a light carrier, the Zuiho, and this force has yet to spot Task Force 8, and that's why they haven't launched their fighters against it yet. And so maybe we'll see that happen down there. If not, we might see some surface combat. So let's go ahead and get started and see what happens. And since the task forces are so close together now, these spotting rules will be modified. So let's go ahead and grab the white D6, because that's what we were using to roll spotting for. And if we roll a 1 or 2, remember that the enemy will be spotted. So this is a submarine. I'm going to skip it. Let's go to the main body. So the main body is 1, 2, 3 away from Task Force 16. So it says that if you are within 4 hexes of a carrier, either player or Midway, or an operational seaplane base, you get a -1 to the roll. So I'm going to use the red die to show that there's a -1 to this roll. -1 if enemy task force is within 3 hexes of a friendly task force with a carrier or battleship. So Task Force 16 has, not carrier, a heavy cruiser or a cruiser. It's got 2, so that's going to be another -1. That's going to be a -2 to the roll. And then -1 if Japanese task force is within 3 hexes of a U.S. task force with radar-equipped carriers. I think that's the case with the U.S. side. It is. The Enterprise has a radar, so there's another -1. So we're to -3 now. And then -1 if the enemy task force is in the same or adjacent hex to the friendly task force or notch. So they're not adjacent, so that's not a count. So there's going to be a -3 to this roll to see if the main body is spotted. We're looking for a 1 or 2. Well, that's a 5. -3 is a 2. So that task force will be spotted. And I'm just going to put a green cube on there. So that's going to be good for the U.S. side. They'll get to launch an airstrike against that task force if they choose to do so. And now we'll go to the next Japanese task force. That's the Aleutian force, which came in. Same thing. So we're looking at, let's see, let's go ahead and get the red die for the modifier. Again, -1 if it's within 4 hexes of a carrier. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. So yeah, there will be a -1 for that. And then 3 for the heavy cruisers or the battleships. That is not the case here. And then they're not within 3 of the radar equipped, and they're not adjacent. So just a -1 here to spot that Aleutian force. Looking for 1 or 2. Well, that's a 3 -1 is a 2. So that task force was spotted. And we will now do the same thing for the first carrier strike force, who is within 4, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 of each of these. 2, 3, yeah, so -1, let's see, did I say 4? Yeah, 4. So you do get the -1 for being within 4, but they don't get the cruiser or the battleship modifier or the radar modifier, and they're not adjacent, so it's just a -1, looking for a 1 or 2. And again, that task force is spotted. It's bad news for the Japanese. And then coming down to the Midway invasion force, there is not a carrier in Task Force 8. There is a there is a, what am I trying to say? There's a cruiser in Task Force 8, so that's a -1. There's no radar equipped, and they are adjacent, so that's going to be another -1, so it's going to be -2, looking for a 1 or 2. Well, that's a 4, -2 is a 2. Everybody's being spotted on the Japanese side here. And finally, we have the close support transport group. I don't think he's going to get any of these modifiers. 1, 2, 3 away from Task Force 8. Well, that's enough to get the -1 for the cruisers and battleships. So he's going to get a -1 to this roll, looking for 1 or 2. And finally, we have an unspotted Japanese task force out there. So now we're going to do the same thing for the US side. And this is crucial for the Japanese. They really want to spot these 2 task forces. And actually, they'd probably love to spot this one as well, because they could, in theory, launch a carrier strike on that one if they ever do spot it. So let's start with Task Force 16. 1, 2, 3. So it's 3 away from the Japanese task force. And that was the, what was that? The main body. So it's -1 if the task force is within 4 hexes of a carrier. So it does get that, because there's still a carrier, even though it's damaged, there's still a carrier in this task force. And it doesn't say that damage or not matters here. Are there any cruisers? There's cruisers in there, so it looks like it's going to get the, well, that's if it's 3 away. 1, 2, 3. Well, it is 3 away, so it is going to get the -1. And there's a note here that says Japanese player day turns only. Well, this is still a day turn, so there is going to be a -1 for that. And the Japanese do not have radar, so that's not going to be a factor here. It's just a roll, looking for a 1 or 2. That is a 3, so that's, they didn't spot Task Force 16. So now we go to Task Force 17. 1, 2, 3. That's 4 away. And this was where all those carriers are. So from 4 away, they're going to get the -1 for the carriers. And they're outside the cruiser or battleship range. And no radar, and they're not adjacent. So it's looking for a 1 or 2. Well, that's a 1, so this task force has been spotted. Down here, Task Force 8 is, let's see, so there's a -1 because there is a carrier in that group. -1 if enemy task force within 3 if they are within range. So this, what I'm trying to say here, this was Task Force, Midway Invasion Force they do have a cruiser, so that's going to give them a -1, so that's going to be -2. No radar, but they are adjacent, so they're going to get the adjacent modifier, so it's going to be a -3 to whatever they roll, looking for a 1 or 2. And they roll a 6. Horrible news. They only spot Task Force 17 this turn, so this is not good for the Japanese at all. And now the US side gets to determine who goes first here, and this is crucial. A lot of options here. So we could move Task Force 17 forward 1. That would put them within extreme distance to strike at the main carrier group down here. Now, Task Force 17 only has the Yorktown in it, so it only has 1 carrier. But they could potentially do some damage to one of the carriers in this group if they choose to move and strike. Task Force 16, of course, can also strike. It does have some damaged air units, I believe, remaining. So this was Enterprise and Hornet. And it looks like there's probably a disrupted marker in here. Maybe more than that. So, but still, they're in pretty good shape air unit wise. So that it could be a successful strike against that main body up there. They could also may want to strike this task force as well. They could drop 1 down to here. 1, 2, 3. So I could potentially hit this thing with both task force. And I might want to do that because, like I keep saying, carriers in this game are really the key. So if we can launch 2 strikes against that main carrier group, then that we could potentially seriously stop the Japanese in their tracks. We also have down here, this carrier is not going to be able to launch its aircraft because it didn't spot Task Force 8. So we could move into here and have some surface combat, maybe try to knock out that carrier as well. So we got to make a decision. What do we want to do? I think we're going to want to definitely move the US side first because, like I said, to get the first attack in on one of these carriers would be huge. And remember that since there's 2 activations, this first activation, if we have surviving aircraft, then we can also launch a second attack if we have surviving aircraft. So that's something else to consider. And the reason why we might consider giving the initiative to the Japanese side, because if they do in fact move their task forces forward, then the next time we move, we will be within range, not extreme range, and we'd be able to launch all of our aircraft against the task force. That's risky though, like I said, because if we give them the ability to strike first, and even though they're extreme range, they could still do some damage to us and possibly even sink a carrier. And that would really be, since the Americans only have 3 carriers, that would be bad. So like I said, I think what we're going to have happen here is we're going to take the initiative. So the US side is going to go first. So we are going to activate Task Force 17, and it's going to move 1 forward, which puts them within 3, so that's extreme range, and they're going to launch an attack. Let me grab a little marker here to show this. They're going to launch an attack against that Fleet Carrier Strike Force, and that's the one that contains those 4 carriers. So the first thing we have to consider is CAP, Combat Air Patrol again, so let's do that. I'll grab the rule book here. This is going to set the CAP level for the Japanese, so let's just set that aside and determine what that's going to be. And it is determined as follows. So let's see, this Midway, don't care about Midway resistance. At least 1 undamaged carrier. So these are 4 carriers in this group, so that's not going to be it. Level 2, if there are 2 undamaged carriers. Level 3, if there are 3 undamaged carriers. Level 4, if there are 4. So CAP is going to be 4 because there are 4 carriers in this group. And this would have been another reason not to attack because the CAP level is so high. But I'm going to double check real quick. I'm pretty sure there are 4 carriers in this group. It's so long since I set it up, I forgot. Yeah, there's 4 carriers in there, so that's definitely going to make the CAP level 4. So this is going to make it tough for these aircraft to get through. And I need to determine I need to get the aircraft out here. They're all going to go in the same way because, like I said, there's only 1 carrier in Task Force 17, and it is the Yorktown. So the Yorktown has, let's see, it has 4 aircraft. So we're gonna see well, they're gonna go in the first airwave. I believe that's how that works. Let me grab the rule book again. And you would determine this before you determine the cap, but it doesn't really matter because that's not going to affect the cap anyway. So we're going to determine the airwaves that they're in well, first thing we do is the ones that are eligible, and that's what I was doing. So the ones that are at range 2 will not be able to go. So we're going to put that back. This one can go, this one can go. So the dive bombers are going, the torpedo bomber and the fighters are not going. So it's going to be these 2 units, and they're going to go in that first wave because they are 3 away, and their maximum range there is 3. And it tells us again that there's only 1 carrier there. They're all in the first wave. So let's go ahead and let's see what's next. We have determined the cap level. This is where we go into anti-aircraft fire. So these are bombers, so it's going to affect them. It wouldn't affect fighters. For each attacking bomber, the defending player rolls 1d6, and on a roll of 5 or greater, that's where we get the disrupted marker. And there's going to be some modifiers here. And this is where we would roll a d10. So I'm going to grab my purple d10. And let's go through the modifiers. So we get a +1 if we have escorting fighters. We don't because we're at extreme range. -1 if the cap level is greater than escorting fighters. Well, it's definitely greater, so that's going to give us a -1. So we're going to use the D6 to show the negatives. And -1 if there is a carrier with a functional radar. Well, that's not true for the Japanese. +1 if it's a second wave, no. +2 if it's a third wave, no. And then the defending bombers air-to-air strength are both 0. So there'll be no further modifications there. So we're just going to have a -1 modifier to this. And what we're looking for is, it says if the modified die roll is less than the cap level, so here the cap level is 4. If it's less than the cap level, then the unit is reduced 1 level. If the modified die roll is equal to or exceeds it by 1, then it's just disrupted, or anything greater than 2 or more, it's okay. So I'm going to grab an American D6, and we are going to roll and see what we get. So it's a -1 to whatever I roll. Well, that's a 6 minus 1 is a 5. So I think this first one is probably okay because it said it is 2 or more than the cap. Well, no, wait a minute. See, I'm not used to having a cap so high. The cap is 4, so that's 5. So it's 1. So it's going to be disrupted, which is probably about the best we could do here, I think. So let's put a disrupted marker on there. So this one's going to be disrupted. And let's leave them on the board for now because I think we've got one more step to go through. And this other one also rolls a 6. So he's going to be, that's a 5 minus 1. Is a 5, so that's going to disrupt it for him. That could have been much worse with that cap level being so high. So that's actually about the best the Americans could hope for there. All right, but that was only the first thing because now they've got to survive anti-aircraft fire. And here we're looking to roll a D6. Again, we'll just leave this one out, D6, not the D10. And there's some modifiers here. -1 if there's only 1 or 2 ships. No, there's way more than 1 or 2 ships. +1 if there are 5 or more ships defending. +2 if the cap level is 3 or more. So this is going to be a +2, it looks like. I'm looking to see if those are cumulative. They're on the same line, so that kind of makes me think they're not. Again, the rule book is a little questionable here. And I'm looking at Stuka Joe's reference card, and it looks like he has pulled down that +2 to its own line. So in his mind, it's cumulative, but the rule book has it is one on the same bullet where it talks about +1 if there are 5 or more, then +2 if the cap is 3. So I'm going to give it 3. I'm going to go with Stuka Joe. And see, -1 if there's no cap, +1 if it's performing a torpedo attack. So I'm looking to see if these have torpedoes. They're dive bombers. I don't think those are torpedo bombers, so no. -1 for undisrupted escort fighter, no. Do not count ships with no. So that's U.S. destroyed, no. So that's it, -3 to whatever they roll. If the modified die roll is 5 or more, it's disrupted. And if it's already reduced, it is eliminated. So if it's disrupted, it's reduced. Okay, so let's start with this first one. And we'll roll the D6. I'm starting to suspect something's wrong with this D6. It's the third time in a row I rolled a 6. So 6 minus 3 is a 3. Modified die roll of 5 or more, it is disrupted. So I'm thinking nothing happened here. No, hold on. See, I'm using this red. It's not -3. It's actually +3. So it's 6 plus 3 is 9. So yes, that is more than 5. It is already disrupted, so it will be reduced. And remember that it does keep its disrupted marker as well. So let's go ahead and put that out. Reduced. So that one made it through. The next one, we roll again. Okay, that's 4 times in a row on that D6. So that's a 6 plus 9. He's also going to be reduced. All right, so they've all this hellacious anti-aircraft fire and cap and everything. Surprised anybody made it through with 4 carriers in that task force, honestly. But they've made it through now. They're both reduced, they're both disrupted, but they are able to still come in and launch an attack on these ships. All right, we need to figure out who they're attacking. So it's going to be definitely carriers, and I just don't know if I want to have them attack. Each of them attack a separate carrier, or I'm just going to pull the Akagi out. Do I want to have them both attack one carrier, or do I want to split them between 2 carriers? Now, since they are disrupted and reduced, they're going to have a combat factor of 2. So they're going to be able to roll 2 D6s, and again, they're looking for a 6 to cause... What are we looking for? So hits from bombing attacks cause 1 level of damage each. Each die roll of a 6 is a hit. So yeah, they're going to roll 2 D6s and they're looking for a 6. So it's going to be hard to hit. I think we're just going to have them all attack one carrier, the Akagi, to make things simple, to increase our chances of at least inflicting damage on a carrier. So let's go ahead and do this. So the first one comes in. Oops. And he rolls his 2d6, looking for 6s. And there's 1 hit, so that's good. He managed to inflict a hit. And I'm going to grab a hit marker. And we're going to put that over here for now. So he comes in. He actually able to hit the Akagi and probably should have attacked another carrier, but let's see. So this one comes in. And he's going to attack the Akagi, and he rolls and that's a miss. So we do manage to get one hit, so he zooms out of there. So I believe first and foremost, I'm pretty sure that's another victory point for the US side. So looking at the rule book, it is +2 victory points for each hit on an enemy battleship or carrier. So that's going to give them 2 victory points. They are now up to 4. And let's look at the damage effects now on the Akagi. So 1 hit, all combat factors reduced by 1, ship speed is reduced by 1 level. The air units of the carrier may operate normally when they are based on the carrier. Damage will reduce carrier's capacity to launch airstrikes as follows. 1 hit, only 2 air units may be launched per activation, so that's going to hurt them. In addition, for each level of damage inflicted, 1 air unit is permanently destroyed. Now it doesn't say, I don't think it says, which air unit is destroyed. So this is the Akagi. And they have, let's see, they have 3 air units in there. And it doesn't say which one, it doesn't say if the player chooses or the enemy player chooses. Let me look at Stuka Joe's sheet. So I don't think it says either. Well, this is interesting. This is what I mean by this rule book is a little unclear at times. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a d6. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to see which one of those is actually destroyed. And let's just roll this white d6. So that's a 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This middle one is destroyed. We will put it out of the game. These other 2 we'll put back on the Akagi. The Akagi goes back into it's actually been reduced 1 speed-wise, so we're going to drop it down to this middle column, put that hit on it so we know it's been damaged. And that is going to resolve the airstrike for Task Force 17. So let's move that, and then we will take these 2 fighters back, put them in the air unit box to the right here. I think that's right. So just looking at that, second air activations, it says any air units in a task force or airbase that activates for a second time can possibly move and attack again as well for each normal status air unit in the task force. Well, so those are not normal status units because they've been reduced and they are disrupted. So we will not roll a die. So they're not going to be able to participate in any second airwave attack. However, these other 2 groups possibly could if we move within range or they move within range of us. So there is a potential for a second activation for those aircraft. But we're not there yet. So that is the first activation for the US side. And now we're going to go to the Japanese side. And so for the Japanese, really the only thing they can do, I mean, they see Task Force 17 and they see Task Force, well, they don't see Task Force 8. They only see Task Force 17. So that's going to be their only target. And I still can move this submarine group. So let me hold on a second. Because remember, when you activate a US task force, you can also activate a submarine. I'm just going to move the submarine forward. We're going to try to hit this close. Is the close transport the one that actually has the transport? Yeah, so he's just going to move this way towards the... and let me look. He's at a half movement. So I think he actually has to roll here. Because it's an odd turn. And if it's an odd turn, you roll a d6. So hold on a second here. So we actually roll the d10, and if they roll a, is it 6 or less? I think it is. Let me look. Yes, 6 or less, then he can move. So let's see if he rolls a 6 or less. When he rolls a 1, so he can move. Then we're going to move him 1. We'll flip him upside down to note that he has moved. And now we go to the Japanese side. And I'm pretty sure that the Japanese here are going to want to attack Task Force 17 with the carrier strike force here. So they're going to do that. They're going to move first, though, to get that more in range. And this could be brutal for the Americans. So they are going to launch an airstrike against Task Force 17. So we will show that. All right, so we're going to look at Task Force, well, not Task Force, we're going to look at Fleet Carrier Strike Force. So we have all of these carriers. I'm just going to kind of push them out so I can see their names. So there's 3 that are untouched, and the, where did it go? The Akagi is down here damaged. And let's start with the Akagi first, because I think it said they could only launch 2, which is all they have, so it's not going to matter really. Yeah, so they have 1 hit, only 2 air units may be launched per activation. They only have 2, so that works out good for them. So we are going to bring out those 2 air units. They will make up the first air wave. And now we're going to roll to see where the other air units go. So the Soryu is here. And make sure these are all within range. They're all 3, so 1, 2, perfect range for them. And we are going to roll a d6 to see where this first one goes. That's a 4, so it's going to become part of the second air wave. We will just put that in the second air wave. This next one will go. 5 is a third air wave, so he's going to go with third air wave. This last one, that's a 4, so I think that is the second air wave. All right, so now we go to the Kaga. We'll do that again, so let's roll and see where they go. A 2, we'll put this one in the first air wave. A 5, I believe, is third, yep. So that's the third air wave, and then this final one. Another 5, so another one in that third air wave. So that was Kaga, and now we have Hiryu. This is the final 3. That first one, that will be part of the second air wave. We got a pretty good spread here of these air waves. Next one's going to go into the first air wave. And then this last one rolls a 6, does not find the target, cannot attack, and returns to the carrier. So this was Hiryu, and I'm looking, I guess he goes to, where does he go? I'm going to put him in available because I think he gets another shot at going out again. Because of the second activation, he's not damaged or anything. Put him back there, and then now we have our airwaves formed. I believe Cap is next, so I'll grab the rule book and we will turn to the Cap section. And now we're determining the Cap level for Task Force 17. All right, so Task Force 17 only has the Yorktown. It is radar equipped, so let's see what happens here. If there is 1 undamaged carrier, yes, so the Cap level is at least going to be 1. I'm just looking to see, I don't think radar, I think it's just the number of undamaged carriers. Seaplanes, yeah, so it's strictly going to be a 1 here for the Cap, unfortunately for the Americans. And so then the next thing we do is resolve Cap. We're going to need that D10 again. And let's get our modifiers out. So +1 if escorting fighters exceed Cap. So how many escorting fighters do the Japanese have? Looks like 1, 2, I would think 3, unless this was a fighter, and it was. And I think the Akagi lost a fighter. So let's do this again. So there's 1 fighter here. So 1, 2, 3. So there's 3 fighters. +1 if escorting fighters exceeds Cap level. Well, it does, so let's give them a +1 for that. -1 if Cap level exceeds escort fighters. Well, that's not the case. -1 if carrier with functional radar is part of the defending task force. It is. We have the Yorktown with radar, so we're back to no modifier. +1 if this is the second air wave. Nope, this is the first air wave we're doing right now. So that's what I was looking for earlier, is this per wave, and I think it is. So Cap is going to be per wave. So let's start with this first wave. Would that mean that there's only 1 fighter then in this wave instead of the 3 total for the whole thing? And I'm going to say it does. Again, I'm going to complain about the rule book because that is not really clear. It says Cap combat is resolved against each air unit in each wave before anti-aircraft fire. So I'm going to say it's number of fighters in the wave. So let's start over. There's only 1 fighter in that wave. So the Cap level is equal to the escorted fighters. So it doesn't exceed. Neither the Cap nor the fighters exceed. They're equal. So no modifier there. We still get a -1 for the, and I'll use red for the minuses, -1 for the functioning radar on the Yorktown. It is not the second wave, not the third wave. And then the defending bomber's air-to-air strength. So we'll start with this dive bomber. Double checking because Cap does affect, yeah, both fighters and bombers. So we'll start with this one. And his air-to-air strength is, so the air combat strength is the first number. The second number is the bombing strength. So it's going to be actually a -2 for this first unit. If this die roll is less than the cap level, it's reduced. And then if it's equal or it's only 1 above, then it is disrupted. So let's see what we get. So 1 -2. So you can only roll a 1 here. So that is equal to the cap. So that's going to disrupt this unit. And I guess that's the only outcome here. Let's just grab a disrupted marker. I guess that's the best we could do in this cap phase. So I'm going to disrupt this one. We'll go to the next one. And so now here his air-to-air is 4. So we go back. It's the same modifiers. This would have been a -1 because of the radar on the Yorktown. And then well, it's not a bomber, so I guess that's not going to count. So do fighters add or subtract anything? I guess not. So it's just going to be a -1 to this roll. So let's see how he does. That is a 3, -1 is a 2. So 2 is 1 more than the cap level. So he's going to be disrupted. I think I'm going to run out of disrupted markers. This next one comes in. That is a bomber, so it's going to be a -2 on this cap roll. Well, 3 -2 is 1. Again, that's equal, so they are disrupting these fighters, and I'm gonna run out of disrupted markers. And I thought when I punched this out that the number of disrupted markers was extremely low, so that's a negative to this game, I think. And then we have the Kogut's, the same thing, -2. Well, that's a 2, so that's 1 more, so he's going to be disrupted. So all these are disrupted so far in the cap phase. And now we go to the second wave, so -1 for that carrier with radar, and then because it's the second wave, it's going to get a +1, so that's a wash. We're back at 0. And let's start with the fighter. So the fighter just rolls straight D10. He's fine. This torpedo bomber is going to get a -1 again, but it's +1 because he's the second wave, so it's just a straight roll. He's okay. Same thing, straight roll. He's okay. And then finally we get down to this third wave, so it's +2. So they're actually going to get a +1 to this. So that's a 9. He's good. This torpedo bomber, that's a 10, so he's good. And then this last one, a 3 + 1's a 4, so he's fine. That is it for the cap phase, and then we go into the AA fire. So anti-aircraft fire only affects bombers, never fighters. So let's get the fighters out of here. And I think the fighters might be done. Let's just go ahead and put them over here. So I don't think the fighters, what, there are 3 fighters? Yeah, there's the other one. I don't think that the fighters attack the ships, but that could be wrong. So I'm looking at some clarifications that I found on this game. Someone was asking, these fighters all have a black 1. So black normally indicates a aircraft is capable of a torpedo attack, but what this clarification says is that the black bombing factor on the fighter is to reinforce the fact that they can perform strafing combat. So I think that's probably going to apply to a Midway land invasion. I don't think that's going to come into play for these ships. Let me take a look real quick, see if I can find this addenda they're talking about. So I don't see any addenda talking about how strafing combat works. I'm going to look at Stuka Joe's stuff here real quick, see if he maybe mentioned it somewhere. He has bombing attacks and torpedoes. I don't see any strafing information. I didn't see it on Board Game Geek, so I'm not quite sure what that's referring to. So I'm going to say that the fighters here Do not participate in actual bombing or attacking these ships. I know it sounds weird, and if you know what that addenda is, please let me know in the comments below, but I'm not sure what's going on there. So again, that's the fault of the rule book, I think, and I certainly didn't see an addenda sheet to this, just this question and answer sheet that I found on Board Game Geek in the forums. So we'll keep going here. And like I said, so the anti-aircraft fire won't affect these fighters. So let's go ahead and get them out of the way. But it will affect all these bombers. Let's go ahead and pull them in. Let's see, are we still tracking waves with the anti-aircraft fire? So it looks like no, we're not tracking waves here, so I guess we can just do these as they come in. And let's see, so for each attacking bomber, the defending player rolls 1d6, so we'll grab a d6. On a roll of 5 or more, the bomber is disrupted, and if it's already disrupted, it is reduced. All right, so let's go ahead and look at our modifiers here for this. So this is Task Force 17 with the Yorktown, which has, how many ships are defending here? 1, 2, 3, so there's 4 ships in there. So it says +0 if there are 3 or 4 ships, +1 if there are 5 or more ships, no. +1 if the cap level is 2, no. -1 if there's no cap, no. And then +1 if the air unit is performing a torpedo attack. So we have to look at these as they come in to see if they're performing a torpedo attack, and that would be if this middle number is black. So it's not on this first dive bomber. So it looks like there's going to be no modifiers. All anti-aircraft fire die roll modifiers are cumulative. So we're looking for a 5 or greater here. So we're going to roll for this first one. That's a 5. This is already disrupted, so I think he gets reduced. So he's reduced, but he keeps the disrupted marker. The next one, not doing a torpedo attack, we roll. It's a 3, so he's okay. The next one, same thing, just a roll of a d6, he's okay. The next one, now he does have a black 3, so this is a torpedo bomber, +1, so he gets a +1 to his roll. That's a 6, so he is disrupted. All right, the next one is just a straight roll. Yep, so that's a disrupted. The next one, again, gets a +1 because he's a torpedo bomber. 3, so he is okay. This one's a torpedo bomber, so +1. Yeah, +1. So he's okay. And I think that's it. I think I grabbed them all. So, unfortunately, that's a lot of aircraft coming in to Task Force 17. So let's go ahead and break out the task force so that we can see what they're going to target. So we have the Yorktown, and then we have a cruiser and 2 destroyers. I'm going to spread them out here a little bit so we can put the bombers where they're going to go. So like I said, these fighters, I'm just going to return them to their carriers because I don't understand strafing. So we're just going to ignore it. And they're going to go back to, I guess they should be in the unavailable. So you could roll again to see if they actually become available. Where's the Soryu? It's here, and then the Kaga. So that leaves all of these bombers coming in, and of course they're going to want to hit the Yorktown. So these, definitely I think we're going to target the Yorktown with these 2. And what else? So we've got, I'm looking for torpedoes. The torpedo bombers, and I guess I should have this one marked like the other ones. So those torpedoes can actually, if they hit right, can sink a target. So I'm going to put all the torpedo bombers are definitely going to go after Yorktown. And then I'm going to put 2 on this cruiser. And I've got these last 2 remaining. What do I want to do? I think I'm going to have this one attack the Yorktown, and we'll just attack one of these. Let's attack one of these destroyers just for fun. Why not? Just to spread them out there. So that's how they're going to attack. So now let's resolve the attack. All right, so the rules are telling us that we can, of course, choose whether or not these are torpedo attacks. It says that the combat factor can be bombing or torpedo, but not both. So I'm assuming here we're going to want these all to be torpedo. And I'm going to look at what it says about the torpedo attacks, because each hit from a torpedo is another die roll. And on a 1 or 2, it causes 1 level of damage, 3 or 4 causes 2, and die roll of 5, 3, and then 6 would sink it. So I'm pretty sure we would want all these to be torpedo attacks. And I'm just looking, I don't know why we wouldn't. All right, so let's go ahead and start with this first torpedo bomber. So he's going to come in and drop 3 torpedoes. He's got an attack factor of 3, so we're going to grab 3 Japanese dice, looking for, in order to do a hit, you've got to get a 6. So he fires his torpedoes. And they all miss, so he zooms out of there. Let's just put him back on the Soryu. Next one comes in, the Kaga, so he does the same thing, 3 torpedoes away. And he completely misses. So Kaga is here. And finally, and this one's at a -1, so he's only going to get to roll 2d6. Fires his torpedoes, and those are misses. Wildly inaccurate torpedoes for the Japanese. And this was the Hiryu. He goes back, and finally, this is not a torpedo attack. This is strictly a bomb attack, and looking for 6s, 3 dice. A complete miss. Wow. Oops, that was huge. That the Yorktown did not take any damage there. I thought for sure the Yorktown was in trouble. So this goes back to the Akagi. And now to the cruiser. Just a regular attack at 3. That cruiser does take a hit. So let's put that up here for now. And then this goes back to the Soryu. And here comes the other one. Again, it's 3 because of the DRM. Complete miss. Back to the Kaga. Finally, against this destroyer, 2d6, looking for 6s. And completely misses. Not a very good attack for the Japanese there at all. Only managed to inflict 1 hit on the cruiser. All right, so this goes back to Hiryu. And so now let's look at victory points. You get 1 victory point for hit on a cruiser, so that's going to give them 1 victory point. We will put the Yorktown back in Task Force 17. This cruiser, so what does 1 hit do? I think it slows it down by a level. So the cruiser goes from movement factor of 2 to 1+. So it's going to be here, but it will affect its movement. So let's put it there, if I can. And then these destroyers go back into there as well. All right, so after all that attacking, Task Force 17 came out pretty much unscathed there. And like I said, I really thought we were going to see the Yorktown go down right there. But no, fate intervened, I guess. The die rolls saved them. So that was the Japanese activation. Their first activation. So now we go back to the US side. And like I said, I think the US is going to want to move Task Force 16 down to try to attack this main carrier group, because they really want to knock out these carriers. They've already knocked out basically the Hosho for all practical purpose. I mean, it has no more fighters, so I think they're going to move down 1, 2, 3. So yeah, that's going to put them at extreme range again, but they're also going to launch an attack on this carrier group. So here we go yet again. So the first thing we do, we have Enterprise and Hornet. and we look at their fighter capabilities, I think some of these are already damaged. Let's pull these out. There's definitely some reduced units in here, it looks like. So we will put the Enterprise units out, the ones that can actually go. So the first wave, this one can go, and then these other are only range 2. So they cannot go. And then the Yorktown, I see lots of disrupted markers here. Oops. So disrupted, and I think this one was also damaged. I dropped it, so I really don't remember. So these two can go. Yeah, so these two can go. But wait a minute, those are Yorktown anyway, so let's put those back. So Yorktown, and I'll straighten those out later. It's the Hornet I wanted to grab. And so this one is disrupted. And we're going to have to see where he goes, what airwave he's going to be part of. Let me grab that. So you can roll a d6 and see where he goes. So what airwave is he going to be in? A 3 is second, so we'll put him in the second. And then this one is undamaged, and he's going to be part of airwave number 1. These other 2 units are not within range. So 3 in the first airwave and only 1 in the second airwave. And now we determine the cap level, which I don't think has changed for that task force group for the Japanese. They still have 4 carriers in there. Well, 1 is damaged, so the cap, let's see, 3 or more, yeah, so instead of 4 now, this is going to be 3 because they have a damaged carrier. And we will now take our air units, U.S. air units, through combat and the cap phase and see what happens. So there are no fighters, so they get no +1 for that. -1 if cap level exceeds, it does. So they're going to get a -1 on this roll. And then no radar. This is the first wave, so we'll start with this first wave. It's just going to be a -1. We're going to roll our d10 and see what we get. So 7 -1, so that's a 6, and that is more than 2, so this one is unaffected. Let's see, the other, so the defending bombers are all 0 strength here, so we don't add any of that in. So the second one, still at -1, he's going to be okay. This third one, he's going to be okay. And this final one, well, that's not good. So that's a 1. He rolled a 1. If the modified die roll is equal to or exceeds the cap level, no, it's if the modified die roll is less than the cap level, then it is reduced 1 level. So the cap level here is 4. It rolled a 1. It's reduced, unfortunately, and it's already disrupted. So let's see if it's air unit was already disrupted, so it's reduced. So it's going to be reduced and disrupted. So we'll flip it, and we'll put that -1 with it. And now we go to anti-aircraft fire. So they're all subject to this because there are no fighters. So let's do our modifications, and we'll start with the top one here. So -1 if there's 1 or 2 ships. No, there's a ton of ships in this task force. So it's 5 or more ships, and the cap level is 3 or more, so they're going to get 3 added to this. Torpedo attacks, nobody's using torpedoes here. So it's going to be +3 to whatever they roll. So we're going to roll a d6. We'll start with the first one. And if this number is 5 or more, then they are disrupted. And if they're disrupted already, they're going to get reduced. 1 + 3 is 4, so he's okay. He's already reduced, though. All right, the next one rolls a d6. +3 is a 4, so he's okay. The next one, that's a 7, so that is definitely greater than 5, so he is disrupted, and we're out of disrupted markers, so I'm going to use smoke markers to make up for the disrupted marker. So he's disrupted. He's smoking. He's disrupted. And finally, this one is already disrupted, so it could be reduced here. He's actually disrupted and reduced, so this could eliminate him if he gets hit, so it's still +3. 6 plus 3 is 9. So unfortunately, it's already disrupted. It's reduced, so he's gone. Shot down and removed from play. Well, at least that gives me a disrupted marker back, so I can take the smoke off. We'll remove him from play. And we have 3 aircraft coming in to attack. So let's see how we want to do this. I think we're going to gang up perhaps on the Akagi. Since it's already damaged, we could conceivably sink it, right? So let's go ahead and say we're attacking the Akagi again. So the Akagi is here, already damaged. And we'll start with the disrupted one first. So he's coming in, he's going to get to roll 3d6 because of the disrupted unit. So looking for 6s. That is a hit. So let's get a hit marker out. There's another hit on the Akagi. And a hit on a carrier is 2 more victory points. And in addition, just looking at this carrier damage again, we'll resolve that here in a second. So the Hornet fighter is going to go back to the Hornet. And then the next one comes zooming in. He gets to roll all 4 d6 at the Akagi. He's hoping for some 6s here. He gets another hit, so that's 3. So let's go ahead and put the 3 marker out now on Akagi. And let's see what that means. Well, let's go ahead and, well, yeah, we better see what that means. I think you can only have 3. No, you can have 4. So let's go one more. He goes back to Enterprise. This one comes in. He can only roll 3. Bombs away. There's another hit, so 4 hits, the ship is sunk. That is good news for the US side. So it's another hit, 2 more victory points, and for sinking a carrier, that's 10 victory points. So now this is actually, we are actually at 18 now, so that is 18 victory points, not 80. So that's 10. Got them backwards, so that's 18 victory points. The Akagi is removed from the game permanently. This goes back to Enterprise. So that is a huge blow to the Japanese. We will remove that. So Task Force 16 is done. We've already activated that, so I can't activate him. That is it for the US side, and now we're going to go back to the Japanese side. And so, let's see, we haven't moved the main body yet. They don't have aircraft anymore, so it doesn't do any good to try to get in a range of Task Force 17. They could move, they don't see Task Force 16, but they could just move forward 1 to try to come around and do some surface combat with Task Force 16, although it is getting close to nighttime. Let's go ahead and just move Task Force, or the main body, up 1. So they move up 1, and I'm just looking to see if they could even do that. So hold on a second. Let's put them back where they were, because they do have the Hosho is slowing them down. They're at a half, so this is an odd turn. They've got to roll to see if they can move. And let's grab the D10. They need to roll a 6 or greater to move. And they do roll a 6. Well, it says greater than 6, so is that greater than 6? Let me look at Stuka Joe's thing here. So greater than, equal to, or greater. So if it rolls a 6 or less, then it can move. So yeah, they can move. So let's move them up 1. Now we go back to the American side, the US side, and I think that Task Force 8 is going to want to attack this Midway invasion force. All right, so I'm going to have Task Force 8 is going to move into the same hex as the Midway invasion force. And I'll just move it, turn it on its side to show its activation. We'll just move this. Well, let's just set this up here. And actually, that's probably going to reveal the Task Force 8 to that task force as well once they're in the same combat, or once they're in the same hex. I think that automatically reveals it. But let's not worry about that right now. We have combat to resolve. Now, the fact that Task Force 8 was not spotted and the Midway invasion force was spotted, the Task Force 8 can achieve surprise here if it rolls well enough. So we're going to try that too. Let's just put the marker on that. So let me grab the rules for the battle board here. This is the first time we are seeing surface combat, so this will be interesting. And we will just go along here and do what it says. So it says on day turns, both players deploy their ships on space 2, so that would be here and here. And night turns, you would roll a d6. This is still a day turn, so they're going to go on line 2 as it says. And the organization says the non-phasing player, that's the Japanese here, deploys his ships first onto the battle board, and then the phasing player. And so the Japanese, what they want to do, since they're being attacked, is they're going to want to, let's go ahead and get the invasion ships out. So the Midway invasion force is here. That's the Zuiho. And let's see, these 3 ships. And put these back up. I just knocked those around. So these are going to go out. And the Zuiho. So what they're going to want to do is put Zuiho at the end of this line, because they like to screen that ship, that carrier, if they can. And so now the U.S. force, Task Force 8, I believe I said it was, is going to put their ships out. And so they're going to match those up. And we have, it looks like 2 cruisers and a destroyer. So we'll just do them this way. Oops, wrong line. So we're going to do cruiser to cruiser and cruiser to destroyer and destroyer to destroyer. So basically the Japanese are screening Zuiho, hoping that it can survive this surface combat. And it says that all ships must be designated with a target before any combat is resolved. And fire is simultaneous here, so let's remember that. And so the first number on the ship markers is its primary guns. The second number would be the secondary guns, and then if there's any of those first 2 with black, and I don't see any, that would be a torpedo combat factor, and that would be 1 torpedo if it were black. And also note that this surface combat can last 6 rounds and no more. It'll end if we make it that far. A side could also choose to withdraw if they wanted to, and after combat is when you roll to see who gets to move, but we'll see that. Let's just go ahead and go through this. So it's going to work out just like I said. We're going to have these first 3 ships are going to fire at each other with the carrier there being screened. So let's go ahead and go through this first round of combat. And it says combat between ships is done, each individual ship firing on its target. There are primary, secondary, and torpedoes. We talked about that. A ship rolls a number of d6 equal to its combat factors. This is just like the fighter combat. And will hit its target with every 6 that is rolled. Each hit will cause 1 level of damage to its targets. Exception, torpedoes cause multiple level damages. That means you'll just roll a d6 again, but no torpedoes in this. We don't worry about that. So ship ranges, primary batteries, and that's the first number. They can fire up to 3 columns away. So we are 1, 2, we are 3 away. So any ships with those will be able to fire. Then the secondary can fire up to 2 columns away. Just a note saying that you can have, after movement, ships can be in the same column, which would be point blank. So let's go ahead and start this and see what happens. One thing we've got to do first, though, like I said, the Task Force 8 could achieve surprise here. So we need to roll for that first. So this is rule 13.1, surprise. And it says an unspotted task force that engages an enemy task force in combat may attempt to win surprise. And basically what will happen is if we win surprise, then the Americans will get to fire 1 round first without any return fire. So it says that the player with the unspotted task force rolls a d6. A result of 4 through 6 results in surprise being 1. Add a 1 to that if a radar-equipped ship is part of the unspotted task force during day turns. So I don't think there's any radar on any of these ships, so we don't have to worry about adding a 1. And then it says add 2 if it's the Japanese player at night, so I don't have to worry about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and roll. We're looking for a 4 through a 6 for the Americans to achieve surprise. And they do, they achieve surprise. Ships in a task force that have 1 surprise are the only ships that fire in the first round of combat. Simultaneous fire is used normally in subsequent rounds. So for this first round, it'll just be the Americans firing. And honestly, looking at those numbers, they're all 0 on their primary attack, so I don't think they can even hit 1, 2, 3 away. And the primary guns up 2, 3 columns away. So I guess they could hit if they had any, if they had any primary batteries. So it looks like they do not. And then once you go to primary, now you go to your secondary guns. They each have 2, but again, I think the range is going to be a problem here. So the secondary batteries fire on all turns at targets with full combat factors up to 2 columns away. 1, 2. So that's out of range, and then there's no torpedo. So they, while they won the, while they won surprise, it did them no good here because they just don't have the range. So that's unfortunate. So now we go to the Japanese side, and they only have 1 ship that can hit with its primary guns. So this cruiser division can fire 1 D6. So we'll grab a D6 and looking for a 6 to get a hit on the Atlanta. They get a 5, so they miss. Again, the secondary guns are out of range. There's no torpedoes, so that's going to be the first combat round. Now we go to movement. And so the way movement is going to work, only one side's going to get to move, and we're going to roll 2 D6s to decide who gets to do that. And basically the player that rolls the highest will get to move his units. And if the roll is a tie, then neither side will get to move. And there are some die roll modifiers here, so let's take a look at that. So each side's going to roll a D6. -1 if the speed of the slowest ship in the task force is a half. So I'm going to take a look. I don't think they are, but maybe the... So this main, so they're all 2 here. Yeah, they're all 2s, so that's not going to be it. +2 if the slowest ship in the task force group is... Okay, so they're going to get a +2. Both sides are going to get +2. So we'll just show that here. We'll just show a 2 and a 2. So we'll put the Americans and then the Japanese. They're each going to get a +2. And then it says +1 if the task force has elected to flee. No. So let's roll and see what we get. So the highest number gets to move this turn. And it looks like the Japanese get to move. And so actually, I got ahead of myself. So what you're supposed to do before you roll to see who's going to move, you first have to select who you're rolling for. So you can roll for the entire task force. And I'm going to say in this case, that's what the Japanese did and the Americans too. But you could also designate just certain ships to move. So if you just wanted to see if the cruiser could move by itself, you would say, all right, I want to try to move that. And then the Americans could say, well, I want to try to move both of my cruisers. And then you would do the roll off. So I should have designated ships I wanted to be moved on either side before I did the roll. But in this case, we're going to say that each side wanted to move its entire task force. And so now that the Japanese have won, they can move the entire task force 1 column. So they're going to do that. They're going to move, let's just do it. So they're going to move forward. And so that's our movement. And I think that's it for turn number 1. So now we're going to go to, well, not turn, I guess round. So now we're going to go into round 2. And it just starts back over again. And again, I'm looking at the rules and I still, this is vague to me. So they talk about when you're doing the battle line organization, this is rule 8.2.2, that the player with more units can screen their ships. Now, I thought maybe that meant it's just at the end of this row. But it sounds to me like maybe it might mean that you would start the carrier further back and then they would just duke it out, and then based on what happens there, then combat would continue. So again, the way these rules are written, it's very vague and hard to understand what exactly they mean there. And there's even a developer's note that says this is especially valuable for protecting aircraft carriers. It kind of tells me that maybe when they say put ships further down the stack, that what they mean is put ships further down the track, maybe? Again, this is weird. I don't know. So we'll just keep going here. And if anybody knows, again, please leave a comment down below. And I honestly, if I had to make a call on, I would think maybe you just leave it back, but who knows? Because they talk about being able to move separate ships. Now we go through another round of combat. So we'll start with the Atlanta again. And now they're range 1, they're 2 away. Still, they have no primary guns, but they do have secondary guns now. So they're going to get to fire. Those secondary guns go up to 2 away, so they'll hit. They'll be able to fire. I don't know if they're going to hit. We'll find that out in a second here. So they're going to roll 2d6. And let's see if they score any hits on that group. That's one hit, so let's put that out. And check to see if there's any, well, let's just go ahead and roll for, so this is all simultaneous, so let's go ahead and just roll for hits. So we'll go now to the Northampton. It's going to fire at the Destroyer Division. Again, it has 2 secondary guns. It fires, and there's another hit, so that's good. And then this Destroyer Squadron is going to fire at that Destroyer Division. Again, there are 2 secondary guns firing. There's another hit. And now the Japanese cruiser is going to fire its primary battery at the Atlanta. So there's only one of those. And looking for a 6. Misses. And now it's got 3 secondary guns, so we're going to fire 3d6, looking for 6s. That's a 1 over there, 2 and a 3. 1, 2, 3. So those are all misses. So he has fired his primary and secondary, no torpedoes. Now we go to the Destroyer Division. It has 2 secondary guns. It fires at the Northampton. Misses, and then the Destroyer Division is going to fire 1d6 at the Destroyer Squadron. And that is a hit on that Destroyer Squadron. And reading this note again, if one player has more ships than the other, then enemy ships can be targeted in any fashion he chooses with the excess. So I'm wondering now, I'm going to assume that Zuio does have 1 secondary gun. I don't know why it wouldn't be able to fire it at this task force. So I'm going to say that the Zuio can choose a target, any target it wants. So I'm going to say it's going to fire on the Atlanta. And it's going to get 1d6 looking for 6. And if I can roll it in the dice tower, that would be nice. So it gets a 4, it misses. All right, let's see what the damage is. The primary batteries. Hits from these weapons cause at least 1 level of damage on any ship at any range. However, primary batteries that hit destroyers, transports, or seaplane tenders will cause 2 levels of damage. Well, we didn't have any primary guns hit. They were all secondary guns. So we've got to remember that, though, in the future, that we should probably resolve the damage or the hits right as soon as we roll for each of these. Secondary batteries. Hits from these weapons cause 1 level of damage on any ship at short range, 1 column away. Hits by secondary batteries at medium range 2 away on the ships with heavy armor, the plus symbol, will have no effect. On a second die roll that is even, shells have bounced off. So let's check for that. Do any of these ships have a plus symbol? I don't see any with a plus symbol, so I'm going to say that they don't bounce off. So we have to remember to look for that as well. If they had a plus symbol on it, we'd have to do another die roll and determine whether or not they actually hit. So all damage on ships are cumulative. Damage levels can be reduced with repair during the recovery phase. So that looks like it. I think the damage just stays there. And then we go into another round. So now we're in round 3. Well, no, not yet. First we have to determine who's going to move. And then we'll start round 3. So to do that, it's the same thing. We're going to do the roll off with the d6. And I don't believe... Well, now these ships are damaged, so does that reduce their speed? I think it does. So going back to damage levels, and probably if this is simultaneous, it wouldn't matter. So damage effects, 1 hit, all combat factors reduced by 1, and ship speed is reduced by 1 level. So a 2 becomes a 1. So this might help the Americans here for the movement phase. So let's do this again as far as movement goes. So now these are all reduced to 1 plus, and so that's only going to be a +1 for the Japanese. And the US side will still get +2. Well, no, it'll be a 1 for them as well because they have this one's been reduced to +1. So the slowest ships are +1, so it's just going to be another roll off with +1 to each. And so we got to designate before we roll. In this case, I think that the Japanese will choose to move the entire task force forward, or the Americans will do the same thing if they win. So let's see who wins. The Americans win this time, so they choose to move all 3 of these forward. See, now we're in round 3. And we go back to combat again. So again, simultaneous combat. We'll start with the Atlanta. It's going to fire primaries first. It has none. Secondary guns, and it's at range of 1. So I don't think that's going to matter. Nope. So we're still looking for 6s. And nope. So now we're going to go to the let's see. No, let's just go down the line. So the Northampton is firing its 2 secondaries, miss, and then that destroyer squadron is going to fire its 2 secondaries. Well, wait a minute. So we have a hit on that ship. I think it can only fire 1. I think its combat factors are halved. All combat factors reduced by 1, so it can only fire 1d6 now. So that is a miss. Now to the Japanese side, the cruiser division can fire its primary gun, and that's a miss. Now it can fire its 3 secondary guns, and those all miss. And then the destroyer can fire, well actually he only should have fired 2 because he's damaged, and I don't think he would even been able to have fired his primary gun because he's damaged. Let's go to the last destroyer division. It's going to fire on the destroyer squadron, and he only has 1 secondary gun, so I don't think he can fire that. Make sure that's right. So he's at half a combat factor, so that would be 1/2, and I don't think it can fire if it only has half of a combat factor. Again, we're going to go back to the rule book and see damage levels. For 1 hit, all combat factors reduced by 1, so it tells me it's at 0. I'm going to say it can't fire. And that is it then. So now we determine who gets to move next round. The numbers didn't change, so it's still going to be +1 for each side. And we'll see who, well, let's see, we're going to move. So both sides are going to move their entire task force if they win. So let's see what we get here. Looks like the Americans win. But no, wait a minute. I forgot about the Zuio. Again, he's got a secondary gun he could fire there. So let's go back and have him fire before I let the US side move. He missed anyway, so it wouldn't matter. So the US side, they may not even want to move here. They can go to point blank, and I think it says point blank. Combat factors have 1 added to die roll at this range. So yeah, I don't think they're going to want to. Ships may also fire over other enemy ships at others further down range. So I think they're just going to hold here and fire again. So let's go down to round 4. The Atlanta will fire on that cruiser division, looking for 6s. That's a miss. The Northampton's going to fire at the destroyer division. That's a hit. It's a hit with a secondary gun, and there's no plus sign, so we now have 2 hits on this destroyer division. And then this squadron's going to fire at that squadron. 2 dice again, yep. And there's another hit. And so now it's return fire, because remember this is simultaneous. The cruiser is going to fire his, and actually I probably should have, so what I was going to say, what I should have done was just added another 1 behind this so that I know, but let's do this. Because these ships are already damaged at 1 level, so I've got to account for that when they fire back. I'm not sure I did that for this destroyer. He should have only been able to fire 1, but we'll let it go. So the cruiser is going to fire at the Atlanta. His combat factors are reduced by 1 because he has I think that was right. A player's aid card would have been very, very helpful here. And there may be one on the back of the book. So all combat factors reduced by 1. And there is kind of a player's aid card on the back of this rule book, but it is not all that great. All right, so he can't fire any of his primary guns. He can fire 2 of his secondary guns at the Atlanta. And he gets a hit. The destroyer division can fire 1 because he had only 1 damage from the previous round, so he can fire 1. That's a miss, and this destroyer division can fire 1. That's a miss. And the Zuio can still fire one. And it's going to fire at the Atlanta again. And that's a miss. And let's take a quick look at damage level 2. So at 2 hits, all combat factors are halved. Ship speed is reduced 2 levels below its printed movement factor, but not less than a half. These are all reduced to a half, and these are down to 1+. So let's go ahead and determine who's going to win movement here. And again, the entire task force will move for either side, so that's our selection. So the Japanese are going to get a -1, so let's get a red for them because their slowest ship is at a half. And then the Americans are going to get a +1 because they're still at 1+ on their speed. And let's see who wins. The Americans win. They're going to choose to move back to row 2. And now we start round number 5. And I believe, let's start with the Atlanta. So it's got 1 hit. Combat factors are reduced by, I think it said 1. So they're going to get to roll 1d6 at the cruiser division. That's a miss. The Northampton's going to fire 2d6 at destroyer division number 2. And that's a miss. And then the squadron is going to fire 1d6 at the other destroyer squadron. And that's a miss. Now the Japanese will return fire, so no primary guns and 2 secondary guns for this cruiser division firing at the Atlanta. Miss. This destroyer division gets to fire, so that's 2 hits on it, so I think it's at half now. So it's at half, dropping fractions, so it can fire 1. So they're going to fire 1 at the Northampton. Miss, and then this other destroyer division can't fire back, and then the Zuio is going to fire at the Atlanta again. 1, 2, yeah, it can do that. That's a hit. So now there's 2 hits on the Atlanta. So now we're going to go to movement again. So here it's going to be this, looks like they're tied again, so it's just going to be -1 for each. So I'm just going to put a 1 here. Let's see. So again, the entire task forces will move. Who gets higher? The Americans are going to get higher, so they're going to get to move first. This is now the final round of surface combat, and I believe they're just going to sit there and fire. Okay, so now let's go through another round of combat. The Atlanta now has 2 hits on it, which they only have 1 primary gun they can fire at this division. That's a miss. The Northampton's going to fire 2 at the destroyer division 2. That's a miss. And then this destroyer squadron is going to fire the other enemy destroyer squadron with 1d6. And that is a miss. Now the cruiser its combat factors are reduced by 1, so it can fire 2 secondary guns at the Atlanta. That's a miss. The destroyer can fire 1 d6 at the Northampton. Miss. And then this destroyer can fire that destroyer. Well, no, it can. It's been reduced to 2. So the Zuio can fire at the Atlanta again. So he's going to fire at the Atlanta. That's a miss. So movement's not going to matter. We don't care about this movement because it is the end of the round. So let's see what it says. At the end of round 6, or one side has all ships 5 or more spaces away. No, it's the end of round 6. When all possible rounds of combat have been completed, they have returned surviving ships to their respective deployment chart task force spaces. Then adjust the task force marker on the map according to the following guidelines. If both sides had ships finish combat within 4 columns of each other, and this is what's happening here, they're 2 away, those task forces remain in the same map hex. So basically they're going to stay in the same hex, it looks like, but it just ends combat. So I'm guessing the Japanese could choose to resume combat or maybe move out of the hex if they wanted to. So these will stay in their place. Task Force 8 will put Task Force 8 back with its damage. And I'm going to try to put this down so I can see the damage. The Northampton is okay. Actually, the Northampton should be here. The Atlanta has 2 damage, so its movement has been cut down to a half. So we're going to put it in the half column. So that's going to slow it down. And then this destroyer squadron is the 1 column. I believe it's in the 1 column. Let's double check that. Speed is reduced by 1 level, so it is at the, should be in the 1+ column, actually. And then this Midway invasion force, let's go and put this back to 1. So the Zuio is okay. This cruiser has been reduced down to 1+ speed. And then these destroyers are both at half speed. So those are both at half speed, and then what else does it say? At the end of combat, place spotted markers on all surviving task force. So I'm going to put 2 on here because they're both spotted. And that ends surface combat. So Task Force 8 moved in there and inflicted some damage on the Midway invasion force, but didn't really sink anything. And they took a little bit of damage in that. The Atlanta is pretty heavily damaged, but the Northampton's fine. So that is it. We now go back to the Japanese side. And so the Japanese now can choose to move that Midway invasion force away if they wanted to. So they can move it a half, and they would have, since this is an odd turn, they would have to roll a 6 or less with a D10. So let's see if they can do that. They're going to try to move out of this battle. And they're trying to get a 6 or less. And they do get a 6, so they can move. I'm going to move them towards Midway. So I'm going to move them this way. I'm going to put a blue marker in addition to the green marker to show that they can still take a second activation. Task Force 8 is in here. Then we go back to the American side. Task Force, well, let's see. I think what I'm going to do is stop it here because we are well over an hour, and I knew this was going to take a long time because of all these airstrikes and surface action that we had going on. So a good place to stop. A lot going on. If I missed anything, or if you know of any rules I messed up, let me know in the comments down below. And when we come back, we will start with the US side again. And I'll just put I'm going to put a blue D6 on this side of the board to say, hey, it's the Americans' activation next. This is upside down. I marked it with a blue just to show that it can activate again. And the reason I did that is because there is a carrier in the Midway invasion force. I could conduct an airstrike on Task Force 8 now that it's spotted. So we got to remember that. But yeah, when we come back, it's the Americans' turn to go again. We still have 2 carrier task force up here that can perhaps launch another airstrike. So we'll see. There you go. That's it. As always, if you liked the video, please give it a like, subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you back here next time.